to trigger a popular uprising, but the plan was not ready. They were training in Guatemala because, of course, they were. The U.S. just overthrew the government there. Where's the other place? The U.S. overthrew a democracy that's going to have terrible consequences down the road. Yeah, Iran, which we can see right now. And so Kennedy got this plan, didn't like it. It wasn't his plan. He wouldn't get enough credit, but he felt he had no choice but to agree to it. And it failed miserably. Almost immediately, the CIA said, we need the U.S. Navy to come in. We need airplanes. And Kennedy did not allow that. He's like, we're not going to invade. It didn't work. It failed. The people of Cuba did not rally to a lot of them were just thugs from the old Batista regime. They rallied to Castro. Here he is at the front. One of the rare pictures of him with his glasses on. And they rallied to Castro. Castro was incredibly popular amongst Cubans. And he stood up to the United States. But now everyone knew the U.S. was behind this invasion. And Castro is going to begin to crack down because he's worried about guerrillas, total war. So Kennedy's humiliated as he soft on communism. And he blamed the CIA for this. He liked covert action, but he didn't trust the leadership of the CIA. He thought they were inept cowards. And they kind of were. And here's the exploding Cuban cigar, get it? So, ironically, a previously scheduled meeting between Khrushchev and Kennedy had already been planned in Vienna. And all of a sudden the Bay of Pigs happened, and it turned into a disaster. Here they're meeting and all smiling faces, but Khrushchev was furious about the U-2 being shot down. Both tried to look tough. Kennedy was desperate to look tough because he knew the older Khrushchev was going to try to browbeat him, which Khrushchev did, and they ended it both furious and closer to nuclear war than ever before. The big issue for Khrushchev was not Cuba, was not even the missiles. It was the divided city of Berlin. And they called it the brain drain. Berlin was wide open. You could go back and forth between the Eastern Soviet occupation zone and the West Allied occupation zones. There are no restrictions for anybody. And there are a lot of people, let's say like pensioners, those people who had retired in the West, living in the East because the rent was cheap and just going back and forth. It was not that, it was wide open. Well, young people from all over behind the Iron Curtain were coming to East Berlin, crossing over and not coming back. They saw the promise of the Soviet-style socialism as a disaster. And it was. This totalitarian state was running into food shortages. It was a police state. It wasn't what they had promised. And they looked at the more moderate socialism of West Germany or France, etc. That's what they wanted. And so they were crossing over. It was called the brain drain. This was given to U.S. forces in West Germany. Kennedy saw this as Khrushchev is threatening to take West Berlin, which Khrushchev was not. So what is Khrushchev, but more importantly, the East Germans going to do to stop the brain drain? They built the wall. August 1968, the Berlin Wall went up, and this would become the symbol of the Cold War. This East German soldier with these sunglasses is going to be taken by this AP photographer about 30 different times. So that's going to become one of the most famous pictures of 1961, him standing there. They put barbed wire up, a hastily built cinder block fence, and now they divide. And this was really scary. All of a sudden, people living in West Berlin already felt surrounded. Now they are literally an island surrounded by a wall, barbed wire, and soon landmines and machine gun nests. Now, people who were not German could cross the border, but now they had to go through a very complex system through checkpoints. Used to just be able to walk back and forth, no big deal. And the divided families, here's holding up a kid, holding up a young Berliner, so he can look over the wall to say hi to his grandparents, who went to bed and couldn't get back. Their home was on the other side of the wall. This happened to thousands of families. This divided. Here's an East German guard making a break. And to many in the West, this seemed like they're swallowing West Berlin and part of the process to take all of Europe. But in reality, it was something very different. If you have to build a wall to keep your people in, there's something wrong with your system. This was an act of Soviet desperation. And even though it appeared to raise tension and there were some armed confrontations, I'll show you one in just a second, the situation would calm over the next 5 years. It calmed down, and the threat of war actually went down. Even though many in the West saw this as aggressive, it was desperation. Here's one of the examples. So the various checkpoints for the British, the French, and the US checkpoint over the wall, this we dubbed checkpoint Charlie. By the way, this is still there, this checkpoint. So even though now Berlin is obviously a wide open free city, they have that there, and they have some young man, young Berliner dressed up in a US Army uniform to stand in front of this. And it's still a tourist trap, and people go get their picture taken with that guy. I did not. And this sign is still there. And while going through my stuff, I just found, I'm losing everything. I'll find another sign. I found a sticker of that sign. That's kind of cool. I've lost everything. I'm throwing things away because I have to move. So Berlin became a wall, this inside here, and John Kennedy would give one of his most famous speeches he ever gave in front of the Berlin Wall the next year in 1962. And then he laid out that the United States is committed to defend West Berlin and Western Europe, just like it's part of the United States. So he's trying to ease the fear in Western Europe and NATO that the United States has a strong commitment to NATO, strong commitment to West Berlin. And so in it, he would say that I consider myself as a citizen of the free world, a citizen of Berlin. And so he talked to the mayor of Berlin, Willy Brandt, and he's going to say, how do I say I'm from Berlin? And it's Ich bin ein Berliner. Here's his note card, said phonetically, Ich bin ein Berliner. So he could say it. He said it twice in the speech. And an important moment, especially at a time where the United States appears to be abandoning our NATO commitments. This was an interesting time, not that long ago. He's a little subconscious about Berliner, and the crowd went nuts. Everyone knew exactly what he was saying. But there was one little thing that would become a big joke. Berliner is the name of someone who lives in Berlin, but it's also the name of something else. Does anyone know? It's a jelly donut. And so, is that what you're going to say? It's a jelly donut. And so that became the joke, that he actually said, I am a jelly donut. And people said, oh, Berliners were laughing. He did not say that. Everybody knew what he said. But yes, he did say, you could argue that he said, I'm a jelly donut. And when I was in Berlin, I bought a little sticker of the jelly donut, and I showed it to my last class, and then I set it down. Yes, I'm slowly but surely going senile. I get it. Yes, it costs €150, and it's a sticker of a jelly donut. I'm still going to put this on something that says Ich bin ein Berliner. Get it? See the jelly donut? You like it? 150. And the Berlin Wall would become the symbol of the Cold War. So when the wall came down in 1989, that poster up there signifies that. That is the symbolic end of the Cold War. And since I grew up in the Cold War, it is still weird for me to think about. But ironically, it turned into an easy stalemate, but the tensions did drop. Here's them putting up a much stronger reinforced wall. Speaking of that, most of the wall's gone. There are a few sections are still up. On the West Berlin side is filled with graffiti on these tourists. But Berlin was actually seen as very bleak and gray because there's the divided city. Now it's a pretty amazing city. But I have 2 pieces of the wall. They're in a little bag, and we know they're true because it says certificate. And so I have 2 pieces of the wall. You can see one with paint on it from the graffiti. So I'll pass around this cost $550. I bought this at the Checkpoint Charlie Museum. I bought one that someone gave me. They'll let you look at the wall. I know you want to take it out, but it has a certificate. You can't mess with certificate. So, while this is going on, humiliated by the Bay of Pigs, the United States began a top secret operation to assassinate Castro, called Operation Mongoose. Now, there were hints and rumors about it, but people would not know about it until 1976. Castro knew. Ironically, because Kennedy did not trust the CIA, it would be run through the Attorney General's office. And in this shocking bit of nepotism, the Attorney General of the United States was John Kennedy's brother, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy. This was an illegal operation run through the Justice Department. It's kind of shocking. They also tried to get organized crime. Here's members of the five family, mafia families in upstate New York in the 50s, because they were mad that Castro kicked out the casinos, the mobs, casinos. Now, organized crime is actually terrible at this time of thing. Organized crime is really good at killing innocent people. And they're also pretty good at killing other mobsters. But they're not good at this because they're mobsters. But it just shows you how crazy this time was. And they did all kinds of things. The organized crime part turned into just a joke. But the CIA had plans of everything from exploding cigars that Castro would smoke a big, massive cigar. He would light it and blow up in his face. To put LSD into his wetsuit so he'd actually strain. Also put sodium nitrate to make his beard fall out. They had a mistress plotted to would kill him while he was in New York in the United Nations. The whole point was they're almost comical. They also had a plan to hijack a plane, say that they're Cuban hijackers and fly it into a government building in the United States, claiming it was Castro. Gee, I wonder if that's going to come back someday. But most Americans did not know about this. Castro knew. And this is going to lead, and Khrushchev was very insecure too. They felt weak. The United States had more weapons. The United States had more missiles. The United States had more bombers. And their economy was significantly better. They both felt weak in Castro. They're trying to kill me and they invaded. So to deter American attack, by the way, there's a Money Mad magazine. They had no idea about the exploding cigar. That's supposed to be Castro. What did it lead to? Anyone know? The Cuban Missile Crisis. October 14th through October 28th, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis. And this was as close as the United States and the Soviets are going to come to nuclear war that people knew about. Speaking for someone around in 1983, I didn't know how close we were in 1983, and I'm very happy. And this is a classic cartoon of the Cold War. It's a great one. And it's showing the problem of deterrence. Here, both sides are sitting on an H bar. The USA, Soviet, the US won, the Soviet won. And they're arm wrestling, political issues, whatever it might be. And also saying they're really not that important. And fingers on the button. But what happens if Kennedy wins this arm wrestling? Where does he hit? See, catch the joke? The joke, even if we win this arm wrestling match, he's going to get blood. And blood. What's really important? They're going to have a name for the mutually assured deterrence. Did you catch that? Mutually assured deterrence. The acronym, it's MAD. And that's the way we work. So, October 14th, another illegal U-2 flight. It picked up on their cameras the Soviets were building sites for intermediate and medium range missiles. They believed that they were not ready to go and would not be ready for at least a month. As it turned out, we were wrong on that. But the intermediate range missiles could reach everything within this circle right here. That means 10 minutes at Washington, D.C. Now, when Kennedy got this, the United States had over 500 missiles in Turkey and Japan, had over 1,000 long-range bombers, and the U.S. already had not only ICBMs, but the first 50-minute man ICBMs were going in around Great Falls. The US had a clear advantage, the Soviets had almost nothing. But no American president could allow this politically. This was a political disaster. And immediately Kennedy sat all in private, decide what to do. They thought it was some kind of attack. Bomb it, which would have failed, almost certainly, or even invasion would lead to World War III. And the first thought is the Soviets should just swallow up Westwood. How about diplomacy? Kennedy was worried that diplomacy might not work, but he would look weak. Even though he had a golden opportunity, because just a few days after they found out, the foreign minister of the Soviet Union, Gromyko, was actually in the White House. By the way, you notice Kennedy's rocking chair? His back was so bad from when he broke his back in World War II. That's the only thing he had relative comfort, despite taking so many painkillers. So they decided a blockade is a measure of war. So they're going to call it a quarantine. They'll stop Soviet ships. Eventually they settle on 100 miles from Cuba to check for missile pods. Blockade's an act of war. And since we are right now in the middle of blockading Iran and calling it a blockade, that's an act of war right at this moment. But anyways, back to this. So here's the US patrol plane flying over Soviet freight. And we believe these are actually missiles, intermediate range missiles, by range about 1,500 miles on this freighter. So the first ship was stopped right up here. And ironically stopped by a destroyer by the name of Joseph Kennedy, after Kennedy's father, one of the weird twist of those. But on October 22nd, 1962, Kennedy went on all three television networks, there were only three television networks, and announced to the population, there's a little bit of the speech, but didn't come through, doesn't matter, the quarantine. And told everybody, everyone knew what this meant. In the Western world especially, that's an act of war. And if the Soviets push it, they'll be shooting. And shooting will escalate to, I think you might guess what this could be. So all over Europe, all American allies, so Australia, Japan, Canada, and of course the United States, prepared for war. And you can even imagine how scared they were. Every city in the United States did an air raid test. Everyone had to find out their shelters. They called them fallout shelters. They started calling that. And they said the next time you hear the alarm, it's a real thing. And it created, I can't even begin to describe the panic. All over the United States and Western Europe, absolute panic. You can see these are people lined up in grocery stores, clearing the shelves out. Because it's confident. I mean, this was terrible. 6 days of prepare. And all these things were happening in secret. No one knew what was going on. Here are people watching it. This is from a book, How to Survive a Nuclear War, how to dig a temporary fallout shelter in your basement, cover it with dirt on a door and stay in there for 2 weeks. I didn't want to think about that, but I did at the time. I remember asking my father, this years afterwards, but should we have that ready? And should we dig one? Ah, the fun of the Cold War. But speaking of panic, look at the scene right here. Absolute panic. Okay. I don't know if that's real or not. I want to believe it's real. So, in on 22nd, the first Soviet ships reached the blockade, and they were sailing at almost full speed, over 20 knots. And then they stopped, and it was stalemate between US ships called destroyers, Soviet freighters, but under the water were a couple of Soviet submarines with nuclear tipped torpedoes and US submarine. And so that's the stalemate. So that's saying the Soviets are not going to push it. Khrushchev realized I might have not realized how the Americans freak out over this and made a mistake. And so over the next 4 days, the United States and the Soviet Union nearly went to nuclear war 6 different times. One time was literally this close, pushing a button that was about this high on a Soviet submarine. That close. It was there, right? It was that close. We did not find out about that one until years later. A number of different things. After the AP exam, I'll tell you all that happened. You will not believe. still have to worry about the APUSH. So, on the 28th, finally, and then broadcasting, Khrushchev had to send a message over Radio Moscow. There was no direct communication between the White House and the Kremlin. On the 28th, the United States and Soviets agreed to, the US would not invade Cuba, the Soviets would remove the missiles. They removed the missiles. And I know I do this all the time. I go back and forth from being present tense, like I'm in 1962, and then past tense, you're just gonna feel with it. But the US had obsolescent missiles in, actually really dangerous, awful missiles in Turkey and Cuba. I'm sorry, Turkey and Italy. In secret, the US also said we remove those missiles. We didn't want to make it look like it was blackmail. But right to the brink of nuclear. Right to the brink. And both sides pulled back, really, actually quite terrifying. And from the brink, it went to two big agreements. Both sides agreed to a limited test ban, eventually leading to no more open atmospheric test ban, and then eventually a treaty saying no more nuclear testing at all. Right now, the Trump administration has said they're going to violate that treaty and start testing. We're going to see where that's going to go. But I like this cartoon. Oh, and a hotline. It wasn't a phone. It was always like, in every cartoon, it was a red phone. It was actually a telegraph line at first. But they wouldn't have to go through Radio Moscow and secret meetings in Washington, D.C. restaurants. I like this cartoon, Kennedy and Khrushchev. Let's get a lock on this thing. Both pulled back. But few people understood what consequences this is going to have down the road. Khrushchev's Politburo, the other leading Soviets were furious at him backing down. And in 1964, he would be ousted from power. They didn't execute him, which was kind of shocking considering the Soviet Union at that time, but he was ousted and replaced with hardliners who vowed never again. We're never going to fall behind. And they dramatically increased defense spending. Over 50% of their economy are going to be for, these are surface-to-air missiles. This is an ICBM in a Soviet May Day parade. This guy, Leonid Brezhnev, became the leading figure in the Soviet Union. My vision of the Soviet Union is him. That's my vision of the Soviet Union. But ironically, by the late 70s, but especially by the early 80s, the economy of the Soviet Union began to collapse because of this overemphasis on defense spending. And by the early 1980s, their economy was in free fall. They actually had to cut defense spending dramatically. And that would eventually lead to the end of the Cold War. And you could say that the Soviet totalitarian state then would die because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this is a big deal. I mean, I'm simplifying it a lot, but that is in essence what happened. Good? So, what about civil rights? Kennedy vowed to get a civil rights bill passed. But Kennedy did not push very hard. Kennedy was sort of inept at getting Congress together, and Southern Democrats were completely opposed. The Republican Party was split 50-50. Northern Democrats were completely for it. Southern Democrats, Republicans are getting increasingly against civil rights, but that's coming down the road. So there are a couple big things we have to get. To attack segregated facilities, a series of sit-ins were very brave young people. So you're aged about 25, risking arrest, but the big thing is be beaten and lynched. You were. They went and sat in segregated diners. This one is in North Carolina. That's now the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Stop something. But they face harassment, see them dumping their drinks on them. And here a guy named John L. Lewis, I'll come back to him in 1 second, is being ripped from his seat and being attacked. Don't forget the whole thing about civil disobedience. It's a morality thing. You have to be really brave to take that. Who's just? Who's moral? Who do we want to defend? Brave young people demanding equal rights, or those dumping drinks on their head? Who's moral? What side do you want to be on? It worked here. It's more complex if you get to the north, for example. And also freedom fighters who wanted interstate buses were still segregated. So they're going to integrate buses. Young black men and women will sit together and they're going to challenge Plessy versus Ferguson. And their stated goal is to go on these routes in southern states and register voters who were denied the right to vote. Now they knew this really wasn't going to happen, but they're going to show the face of the United States, especially in the South. In Alabama, their state police would stop the bus and then allow a mob to firebomb it. Here is the bus right before. You see the young people. Takes a hell of a lot of courage. Here they're firebombed. They're sitting near the bus. And then who do they blame? The state police came in with truncheons, clubs, and beat the hell out of the Freedom Riders. Here's John L. Lewis again. And you notice his jaw is fractured. Right there. See how it's collapsed? He would be a 9-term member of the United States House of Representatives from Georgia. He passed away a couple of years ago. Pretty amazing man. He always had a speech impediment because they crushed his jaw. The point is that people who demand equal rights are not going to stop, despite the fact that Kennedy looks bad for not doing this. And then one more thing. This was at a time where the most liberal court, even though it was still pretty timid. Remember the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education? So we all know Brown, right? Everyone knows Brown. Well, let's get to 3 more big cases of probably the most liberal court in American history. We have a very conservative court now, especially economically. It's probably the most conservative court. 3 court cases we might need to know. Abel versus Vitale. And that's that there would be no more required prayer in school. Almost every school in the United States, but especially in the southern United States, had required, almost always Protestant Christian prayers. And this could not happen. You can still pray in school, of course you can, but that's to yourself. You're not going to force others. So I remember when my brother, first marriage, stuff happens, but his wife was Jewish. Her dad talking to me about this because he knew I was a teacher. I'm going to be a teacher at this time. And he said, he started talking about this. How uncomfortable it was to be forced to do Christian prayers. I was a Christian. It was really, just made him feel really bad. And I just remember thinking, this is really weird talk at a wedding, but I'm glad you told me. And another incredibly important case is Griswold versus Connecticut. And this says that the Constitution does have some privacy rights under the 14th Amendment, well, the 4th and the 14th. The Constitution does not say you have privacy rights, but it's implied. The big issue was birth control. The states denied women access to birth control, and they ruled that it's part of the women's privacy rights. So this is one of the most important decisions on women's rights, but especially, or privacy rights, but especially women's rights. The state constitution of Montana has privacy rights in it. I should add, at this moment, the Supreme Court is going to rule again and possibly overturn Griswold. It's right now about abortion bills, right at this moment. And it's going back to this case. It's one of the most important cases. Lastly, Miranda versus Arizona. Under the 5th Amendment, it says that you have the right, remember habeas corpus? You remember the term habeas corpus? I want nods from people. Habeas corpus, you must be right to told them what you're being accused of and have a trial. People have to be informed that they have certain rights. So beginning in the late 60s, they started giving police officers a little 3x5 card, and soon it would be on every television show with police officers. But they start reading people their rights. That came out of this decision. You have the right to remain silent. They don't have to say that verbatim, but they all kind of do now. So, a lot of conservatives were furious at him. This sign was actually or a sign like it. I don't have a picture of it. I wish it would have had a picture, but it was hard to take pictures back then. Right outside of my hometown in Miles City. It was still there about 15 years after Earl Warren was no longer Chief Justice. There was still an impeach Earl Warren sign outside of the town I grew up in. But because of inaction on civil rights, labor organizers and the Southern Christian Leadership Council, the organization that Martin Luther King was one of the key leaders of, organized a march on Washington for jobs and freedom on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And it was to push Kennedy to do something. And the big fight was for economic justice, economic rights. So better opportunity, the jobs, better opportunity for education, to provide careers, but also to redress past injustices, which was the big issue of Martin Luther King. To do something about the fact that African American, they would have said, man, we're denied rights in the past. We have to make up for that now. And they once pushed Kennedy. Kennedy begged them not to do it. Begged them. But they did it. Hey, nothing happens. Those in power will never give up their power unless they are pushed. Because if they're not pushed, why do it? So as mad as Kennedy was, this embarrassed him, but they met. I like this picture. All the leaders of it are all smiling. There's Martin Luther King. That's Victor Ruther was head of the American Auto Workers. Unions were very pro-civil rights. Kennedy's smiling. He's so mad. There they are right before they talked. But this was to push. And so Kennedy had very little success in his domestic policy, it seemed like. So he wanted, and there's going to be a massive conservative backlash. That this is going against traditional values and people not knowing their place. This is a picture I showed you once before of Martin Luther King at communist training school. And it's really interesting to see public opinion polls on this. The vast majority of Americans in a Gallup poll, 60% were unfavorable to the March on Washington. There's a lot of either we don't need equal rights, Jim Crow, separate but equal is perfectly fine, Jim Crow is perfectly fine, or it makes me uncomfortable, it's quit pushing. You would not believe how unpopular Martin Luther King was amongst especially white people when he was assassinated. So many are going to say he deserved it. It's going to be shocking how many. But back to this. So Kennedy looks weak. So the only thing he has success in is foreign policy. And that's when he decided for escalation in South Vietnam. Eventually they would go from 1,000 to 18,000 advisors and a significant amount of money in South Vietnam. Here is a US Green Beret called Special Forces. More Green Berets, copying French, less Green Berets, Kennedy loved them. But they were training South Vietnamese forces. Soon American helicopter pilots are ferrying South Vietnamese, and secretly the Navy and Air Force are attacking Viet Cong sites. There are American soldiers being killed or wounded. We are involved, it's not full escalation. Kennedy is making this important because he looks bad in domestic politics. But there's a problem. It's not going well. So you have a choice. It's not going well. Do we pull back? Or do we commit more? Kennedy decided to commit more. Here are the reasons he committed. The first one we know, the domino theory. Now the domino theory, South Vietnam has nothing to do with other countries for the most part, but it did right. Also, Berlin. We got to prove we're going to defend our allies. It's so amazing that to think of we're going to go into a civil war in South Vietnam because of West Berlin. And then civil rights was becoming a black eye for Kennedy because he could get no results. And then, of course, he wants to look tough. So these are the reasons Kennedy committed. By the way, what's missing for his reasons to commit to South Vietnam? What's that? Yeah, it has nothing to do with South Vietnam. It has nothing to do with it. Oh, we claim it is, but it has nothing to do with South Vietnam. We are getting involved there for domestic political reasons. You're kind of doomed if you're not doing it for the actual reason you're going to, or the country you're going to fight and die in. So, the problem is this. By the summer of '63, it's not going well. South Vietnam is losing. And there are mass protests against the corrupt government in the streets. Here's two of the most famous pictures of the Vietnam War era. Now, Americans today will see these pictures, they remember back at these pictures. You get people, adults today, will say this is protesting the US involvement. No, this is protesting the corrupt government of South Vietnam. Buddhist monks were committing self-immolation, lighting themselves on fire, to protest the corrupt government that the U.S. was supporting. And I can't even, this is just horrific pictures. Once again, I could use color pictures, they're more horrific, black and white kind of goes back a little bit. But these surreal images of just people watching it. This police officer, this one that always gets, just to me, it's just so weird. You see what he's doing? He's watching a man burn himself alive. And he's pulling out a match to light a cigarette. And that's just so weird to me. The president of South Vietnam, Nguyen Diem, was corrupt, hated by the people of South Vietnam. The army, the officers were chosen by loyalty and cronyism. They were stealing from their soldiers blind. It was a disaster. So when leading generals went to the US CIA and the ambassador to Vietnam, they went, a guy named Bunker, but they went to him and they said, we want to overthrow him. We want to overthrow him, kick him out of the country. We'll put a stronger government in. Very reluctantly, the US approved to a coup, to overthrow him. They promised to exile him. Instead, he was brutally murdered in the back of an armored personnel carrier. Him and his brothers. Kennedy was shocked. He thought this would be a bloodless coup and have a government then that would be at least less corrupt. They knew they'd be corrupt. It turned out a bloody coup, the killing of a president in October 1963, but everybody's going to blame the US. Everybody blamed the US. So Diem was killed, and now it's going to lead to a series of military dictators, and the US is stuck with them. We have no choice but to support these dictators. Here's one of them, Nguyen Big Diem, the US called him. And he'd be out for a while, come back. There's going to be about 10 different governments until finally a military dictator by the name of Tu took power. And everyone's going to say, we're going to start a democracy and freedom's on the march and constitution. And there'll be a brutal dictatorship. They'll be thrown out, but the US is stuck with them. We have no choice. A very similar thing is going to happen to the United States in Afghanistan in your lifetime and in Iraq. We're going to be stuck with corrupt governments. And because we have no choice. Who else are we going to support? If we pull out, they collapse because the only reason they're standing up is because of the United States. So this was a disaster. Kennedy blanched when he heard this, got noticeably white. Oh my God. We weren't supposed to kill him. What does that say about us? Because everyone's going to blame us. And that's going to be ironic because what's going to happen a little bit over a month after Diem is killed? You know, Kennedy will be assassinated. November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. On his way to give a speech bragging about how well we're doing in South Vietnam, aka lying, Lee Harvey Oswald, a devoted communist who tried to defect to the Soviet Union, lived there for a year, came back, tried to defect to Cuba a month for the assassination. He's an interesting guy. Assassinated Kennedy. Here's the rifle he used, an Italian World War II era rifle. He tried to shoot a police officer when they arrested him, so they kind of roughed him up. And the evidence was cut and dry. They had the evidence, clear evidence. But then it got even weirder. Less than 2 days after Kennedy was assassinated, a strip club owner by the name of Jack Ruby assassinated Oswald in the basement of the Dallas Police Department. And this immediately sounds weird. It was a whole series of just weird controversy or coincidences stuck them together. And it was on TV. People were watching Oswald and ironically Kennedy's body being taken to the US Capitol for lie in state, a big procession, going back and forth. See the gun? Ruby said he was trying to save the Kennedy family from the trial and thought he would be a hero. But now it looked like something else. But the big thing people worried about was this the Russians? Was this the Cubans? Is this World War III? The brand new president, Lyndon Johnson, immediately thought I had to assuage fears and not go to war. And he coerced the Chief Justice to be head of a commission, even though the commission had very little to do with the actual report. called the Warren Commission. They would issue what's called the Warren Report to prove it was not the Russians and the Cubans. Over 1,000 FBI agents would be involved in this investigation. They would interview thousands of people. The investigation was shockingly complete, even though the CIA and the FBI lied about a number of things because they were proved to be inept. The FBI was watching this world. It's getting affected. But they came up with all fault acting. But after a series of events happened in the 1960s, more and more Americans by the end of the decade believed that the government was covering us. And there were some cover-ups. The FBI screwed up, for example. But by the end of the decade, people began to believe maybe it was the CIA because of the Bay of Pigs, or Vietnam, or organized crime. And the US was, or that the US government was covering up the assassination of their own president. To this day, the majority of the population of the United States believes that there was some kind of cover-up. Do they have evidence of a cover-up? No, there's no evidence. There's never been any evidence. But it just seemed so weird. The new president, oh, almost forgot. Hey, let's talk essays. This is a good time to talk essays. So on the AP exam, you're going to have two essays. We've talked about this many times. But when you get the questions, let's review this very quickly. When you get the questions, do a quick brainstorm. Get your mind thinking about what you're writing on. Then read the documents. If it's DBQ, think about your thesis, make a quick outline. Get this done before it's so easy to forget stuff. Then let's review the two essays you're going to have to do. 4 to 5 sentences. If you got a good 4 to 5 paragraph, a good 4 paragraph essay, you're going to be good shape. If you got time and you want to make sure that you get the top score possible, add another paragraph, cut more facts. But if you're running out of time or not sure, just make sure you get that 4 paragraphs, okay? Got that? Make sure you get that. And then context, cause and background, thesis, underline your thesis. Topic sentence, explain it. Take the time to explain what that topic is. Evidence, 2 documents, paraphrase, relate to the thesis. Why is it shaking so much? At least 1 why statement. At least 1. You get 2, get them. 1 additional example, outside information. And then analysis, right back to the thesis. Problem with the DBQ is you're going to get 1 choice and that's it. So format is going to be really important. The other long essay, I'm not too worried about. It's basically just not much more short IDs, not much more to DBQ. You just write your own information, but you get 3 choices. So you're going to be able to pick the one you know the best. But the only difference in the paragraphs, topic, summary, 2 to 3 pieces of your own evidence related to the thesis, analysis, that's it. Restate the thesis. Try to get more context in, what it affected, what it led to. That sound familiar to everybody? So this is the biggest part of the test. It's important. This is the one. Don't quote. Everyone got it? Remember? Don't quote. Paraphrase. Cite your documents. All right. So let's get to, everyone, the last part we're going to get to very quickly. The Great Society. That was Lyndon Johnson's program. Lyndon Johnson announced a massive government initiative to finish the New Deal, to show all of Kennedy's people who hated Johnson that I will get everything Kennedy wanted and more. And this program is going to be huge. And Johnson will show how an incredible legislator he was. No president before or since has been as successful at passing bills as Lyndon Johnson. There's going to be over 1,000 bills that are going to do these 3 main things. Civil rights, and we have to know 2 civil rights bills. A war on poverty. Over a quarter of the population of the United States was below the poverty line. He said the richest country in the world should not have this much poverty. And they would reduce it down to less than 10%. Now, that is more liberal economics. We have about 14, and cultural growth. Aid for arts, humanities, college education, if that was incomplete, that you are going to know. And also things like public television and national public radio. The government helped fund that to not have television based upon you just selling advertisements. And these are all very liberal economically. President Trump signed a bill to basically cut off funding for public television, public radio, aid for the arts, science. We've kind of basically ended all. We might go back, we might not.
Assassinations. Remember the like book assassination is gone.
If enough people let me know, I'll put it on Teams. If you don't want the review on Wednesday, you know, I'm not going to make it. But if people want to review and I will film it, I will do it. My free time. I'm not going to give it to you unless you do it. Okay, that's it. So I won't do it. You know, life is easy. Very good.
The Lego assassinations. I understand. I guarantee you. Because I know we looked at it for the like. I know we looked at it for one of the Roosevelt. I know Roosevelt was in there once. Book of assassinations. Yeah, it's a
Come on, everybody.
yeah, exactly. It's a book of like every assassination.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Depicted.
Very good. Oh, I'm sorry, but you did them?
Because I was gone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you didn't.
It's okay.
You want me to look at and tell you did?
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
thank you.
Oh, thank you. Very good, very good. How's you doing? Were you able to go back and look at some of the ones you missed? Were you able to get those? It's just, you know, they ask very vague questions.
Yeah, the wording was kind of tricky.
So that's why go back and look at some of the sample ones.
Also, a lot of them have like answers that could be both used.
Yep. I know. I hate when they do that too, but very good, very good. And the thing about it is you go back and look at them, get used to them. You look good. All right.
I was Marjorie.
You're back.
Yeah,
Have you ever been over like in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a
about a
month?
week and a half. Just a little over a week.
Wow.
It's been a hot second.
So because you were in Atlanta and then you had all kinds of, then where?
Then just the float stuff. And then yesterday I had my AP bio test.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because you guys didn't go back till Tuesday night.
From Atlanta, we got back Wednesday afternoon late.
That's what it was, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, Wednesday, so because Carson was here.
yeah,
Carson came in, but he wasn't working on a float.
yeah. Medium float is always awesome.
I got through the 49 multiple choice, but then there's like, where is it? I like these ones are like 1, 2, and 3. They're like A, B, and C.
Yeah, those are short answer questions. Our class. You don't have to do those, but just look out. So basically you pick the topic, if you're doing for like A, B, and C. You just go and decide which one you're gonna pick. And then there's a key in there, great. Yeah, okay.
I don't ever see her practice, so.